could have been U.S. airstrikes, but here's the point. We simply do not know what they were. Now, the first F-15E fighter bombers took off from Saudi Arabia at 12:50 a.m. That would be Saudi Arabia time. That would be at 4:50 p.m. this afternoon, Eastern Standard Time in the United States. The first F-15E fighter bombers. Now, those are manned fighter bombers, not to be confused with the cruise missiles. It's now confirmed by the U.S. military that they took off around 4:50 this afternoon, Eastern Time in the United States. The base's chief maintenance officer in Saudi Arabia, Colonel Ray Davies, said, and I quote, "This is history in the making." Now, the F-15E, so-called Eagle, is an attack fighter. It's the best U.S. fighter. It's generally considered on a worldwide basis to be the best in the world. It attacks targets on the ground and in the air, which is to say it's capable of air-to-air combat and also striking targets on the ground. It has air-to-air missiles and also bombs. Now, let me pause and say that the White House has given us a 2-minute caution. Something of import is about to happen at the White House. We'll be covering it live for you here as part of our CBS News coverage. It's clear war has begun in the Middle East. It is believed that U.S. fighter bombers are at this moment attacking Iraq and have been for several hours now. And it's believed that U.S. cruise-type missiles also are hitting targets inside Iraq. The Iraqi government was reported around midday today to be trying to move chemical weapons within reach of U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia. That's the situation as we await some official White House announcement. Marlin Fitzwater, the well-known spokesman for President Bush, has just told us just a few seconds ago that we could expect something at the White House. We know not what very shortly. We want to emphasize that the information that we began passing along from CBS News and our correspondents in Baghdad, in Saudi Arabia, at the Defense Department, and at the White House is now, following on behind that are coming reports from the wire services, principally the Associated Press, and the wire services are now confirming and quoting official U.S. military spokesmen with such quotes as history is in the making, and confirming that the fighter bombers, these are manned fighter bombers, this F-15E, and no one should have any illusions. Once these fighter bombers get over Iraq, casualties can be expected. Real war, real death, real wounds, real pain. We go now to the White House.
I have a statement by the President of the United States. The liberation of Kuwait has begun. In conjunction with the forces of our coalition partners, the United States has moved under the code name Operation Desert Storm to enforce the mandates of the United Nations Security Council. As of 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Operation Desert Storm forces were engaging targets in Kuwait and Iraq. President Bush will address the nation at 9:00 p.m. tonight from the Oval Office. I'll try to get you more as soon as we can. Thank you very much.
Marlin Fitzwater saying what he had to say at the White House, taking the biblical admonition, let your yeas be yeas and your nays be nays. As you saw, Fitzwater walked out, read what he had to say, and walked away, did not take any questions. But the most important thing is the President of the United States will address the United States, and for that matter the world, in about an hour and 52 minutes. That would be at 9 p.m. tonight, Eastern Time. Of course, our CBS News live coverage of what is now clearly, and it always brings a lump to your throat, but what is clearly war in the Middle East. We are now talking about matters of war and peace. Let's pause for a second again to absorb that and to know what's happening in these hours in and around the Persian Gulf, and go to our CBS News White House correspondent, Wyatt Andrews. Wyatt?
Dan, that announcement was quite brief, but Marlin Fitzwater actually managed to say a lot. First pointing out that Desert Shield has now become Desert Storm, and with that name, it's obvious that he is confirming what the wire services and David Martin were reporting earlier, that this has turned to war. The other interesting point, of course, Dan, other than the report that the President will address the nation at 9 o'clock, is that Fitzwater said that forces were being engaged in both Iraq and Kuwait. Meaning that the theater of operations here in this brief disclosure by Fitzwater is not confined just to Iraq right now, but that the United States is bombing targets also in Kuwait. I'm sure we'll find more details from the president. This is following, I should add, Dan, a very closely guarded White House script. They had promised all along that the go order would not be very complicated. It would just be a matter of the president announcing that he'd launched it. That's what we heard from Mr. Fitzwater. The details to come in 2 hours.
Thanks, Wyatt. And in Washington, and the rains came. War in the Middle East. Here's what we know and what we don't know. U.S. fighter bombers F-15E Eagles are striking targets in Iraq and in Kuwait. It's believed, not yet confirmed, that U.S. cruise-style missiles, these are unmanned missiles, Tomahawk, that's a version of the cruise missile, also, we believe, have been fired at targets in Iraq and or Kuwait. The attack began around 4:50 Eastern U.S. time today and has continued since then. There have been reports of flashes of light in the distance in Baghdad. Now, let me describe for you that Baghdad is a fairly large city. Those of you who haven't been there might be surprised at how modern it is, with a lot of freeways, some fairly tall buildings. There have been no reports of any flashes in the downtown section of Baghdad itself. There are, of course, many military installations around Baghdad, and in the distance this evening, Alan Pizzey, Larry Doyle, our other correspondents in Baghdad reported seeing these flashes in the distance. They didn't know what they were, and they still don't know what they were. The U.S. military has confirmed the following. They have confirmed that F-15E fighter bombers, they can do air-to-air combat to take out enemy aircraft, and they can also hit targets on the ground. We're taking off from central Saudi Arabia. In the easternmost part of Saudi Arabia, and what would be the largest U.S. air base in that part of the country, a steady stream of fighter bombers have been taking off for quite some time. Now, let us underscore to you that insofar as it can be determined, what has begun right now is the air war. Ground troops, U.S. ground forces, Marines, Army troops, insofar as anyone can determine, while they are poised to strike, have, so far as we know, not, let me underscore the word not yet, started to actually strike. Let's go to David Martin, our CBS News Defense Department correspondent at the Pentagon. David?
Dan, these F-15Es that were reported taking off from central Saudi Arabia, those are aircraft which are designed to fly very low at night, and they carry 12 500-pound bombs. And if you believe the pilots who fly them, they can use, with computer-assisted bomb sights, they can hit within 15 to 30 meters of their target. They go in very low.
Well, unfortunately, we lost our audio and video to David Martin at the Pentagon, but what David was doing was bringing us up to date on the kind of attack that is obviously underway against targets in Kuwait and or Iraq at the moment. We believe that the attack is at least two-pronged. One, and this is in no particular order, the attack by the cruise-type missiles, the Tomahawks, which can be fired from sea. As General George Christ, our CBS News consultant, underscored earlier, those Tomahawk missiles could be fired not only from U.S. Navy ships in the Persian Gulf, but also from the Red Sea. That would take them firing on the Red Sea across Saudi Arabia on into Iraq or Kuwait. And also, we don't know whether this has been done, the Tomahawk missiles could be fired even from U.S. Navy ships in the Mediterranean. If they were fired in the Mediterranean, they would have to go over Syria in order to reach Iraq, but having a range of at least 1,400 to 1,500 miles, the Tomahawk missiles could have been fired from the Mediterranean into Iraq as well. Now, Bob Simon, in Saudi Arabia, lots of air activity still continuing there, I gather.
Yes, Dan, we've received an additional detail just in the last few minutes that from a central airbase in central Saudi Arabia, from a large airbase there, C-130 transport planes have been taking off every few minutes for the last hour. Right now I can hear more aircraft taking off around me right here in eastern Saudi Arabia. Let me emphasize that recently, yesterday in fact, a senior Air Force commander here predicted that the air war, the establishing superiority in the air, would take the Air Force approximately 2 days, as long as Saddam did not hide any of his planes. This Air Force commander thought that Saddam would engage the American Air Force, that he would lose, and that if he put all his planes up at once, it would take the Americans 2 days to clear the skies. Here are some more fighters taking off right now. I can tell if they're F-15s or Tornadoes, they are one or the other. Those are the kinds of aircraft which are housed in this base here. The Air Force commander also said that he expected that the Americans would take some losses, that some American planes would be shot down. We'll have an answer to that, I'm afraid, within the next couple of days now, Dan.
Thanks, Bob Simon. And when Bob Simon speaks of the Tornadoes are the basic British fighter bomber. They are stationed side by side with many of the United States Air Force planes. So when he said he couldn't tell whether that was an F-15E taking off behind him or a Tornado, of course the aircraft, particularly to the non-expert ear, sound very much the same because they're aircraft designed to do pretty much the same basic thing. I want to underscore, always in the spirit of telling you what we don't know as well as what we know. We do not know that British aircraft are yet involved in any of these airstrikes. What we know is that airstrikes, we're talking about airplanes with people in the cockpit, have started to attack Iraq and or Kuwait over the last 3 hours, and we believe that cruise-type missiles, primarily fired from the sea, the so-called Tomahawk missiles, have also been launched in the direction of Kuwait and or Iraq. And when we say Kuwait and or Iraq, again, let me underline to you what we don't know. It is believed that the air war which has begun, there is war in the Middle East, war in and around the Persian Gulf, with all that that entails and all of the consequences that may flow from that, it is believed that so far, these are airstrikes, both by airplanes and missiles. We believe that no ground forces are involved in the offense. The United States is on the offense in the very early stages of the war. Now, we believe that attacks are going on inside Kuwait as well as inside Iraq, these air attacks and possibly missile attacks. We believe that because Marlin Fitzwater said a few moments ago in his White House statement gave indications that that was the case. I want to remind you that the President of the United States will be addressing the nation now at 9 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. That would be about 1 hour and 44 minutes from now. This is Dan Rather at CBS News headquarters in New York. This is our special CBS News coverage of war in the Middle East. We will, of course, be on the air continuously on this CBS station. We're trying to be a steady, reliable, dependable point for you to get information. And part of our candor, what we hope is a straightforward approach to this, is to always emphasize to you 2 points. One, in the early stages of this or any other war, it's very hard to find out what the truth is. Someone once said the truth is rarely pure and never simple. It's never truer, that saying, than it is in the early stages of war. Truth is frequently the first casualty of any war, and it will be in this one. It's inevitable. So we pass along what information we have. We try to check and double check it for you, but inevitably, we're bound to make mistakes. We hope we make as few as is humanly possible. Now, Air Force retired General, very recently retired Air Force General Michael Dugan is in our Washington Bureau. General, first of all, from what you have heard so far, what do you think the most important things are for our audience to know?
Most important thing, Dan, I think, is that our forces have been well prepared. They've thought about this action for the past several weeks, if not the past several months. They've had a chance to exercise in the environment that they're in, and the President having made a decision that war would occur, the troops are ready to go out and carry out their duties in the best fashion possible, and with the minimum casualties to friendly forces. And also, I should add, the rules of engagement normally include, and I'm sure they do in the circumstances, minimum casualties to civilians that would be in the vicinity of airstrikes.
I want to make sure I understand you, General, that the plan insofar as you knew it, and I recognize that you have to be careful here, the plan was to minimize civilian casualties, that we aren't talking about bombing designed to terrorize the civilian population.
That would be incredible for American way to pursue war. On the other hand, there is great terror that comes with war. And if one finds an important target that has a key communications node, a key area where communications come together, and it happens to be in an area where civilians live, it would still be important, I believe, for the United States to take that
I hate to interrupt you, General, but there are air raid sirens in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. That is the largest U.S. base. We're going to go to Bob Simon in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Bob?
Dan, I don't know how good this audio is, but the siren started about 30 seconds ago, and we don't know what it means. We don't know if it means anything. People have been very nervous here all day, and Of course, nerves have gone up enormously in the last half hour. The Americans have been saying from the very start and have reinforced over the last couple of days that they do expect Saddam Hussein to try and send something down here, perhaps in the way of Scud missiles, perhaps even some aircraft. People around the hotel we've been staying have been walking around with their gas masks all day, and this is hardly a surprise. Was expected. It might mean nothing. It might mean that somebody knows that something is on the way. Dan?
Bob, are the air raid sirens still sounding?
The air raid sirens are sounding, and another siren has just begun. I believe that is a siren for people in the hotel to go down to a shelter.
Let's, just for 1 second then, Bob, keep an open microphone. Perhaps we've lost our audio. Let's keep an open microphone and listen to that noise for just a moment, that sound. The sound of war in Saudi Arabia as air raid warnings are sounding around the largest American base, military base in Saudi Arabia, around Dhahran. Now, if you want to look at the map, as a matter of fact, Bob Schieffer, we can go to you very quickly. You can show us, you and General Christ, roughly where Dhahran is, if you're prepared to do so. Dhahran is right there. Would you point again, General, if you don't mind?
Right.
Well, that's Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. You see the Persian Gulf, Kuwait above it, and you see where Dhahran is. That's where Bob Simon was a moment ago, and where he says that they're going into bomb shelters in Dhahran. Bob Simon has just left his broadcasting place to head for one of the shelters. Now, we have lost our signal to Dhahran. Perhaps you saw a flash up on the screen there. We no longer have a signal to Dhahran. Now, in the spirit of what we know and what we don't know, we do not know that there's an airstrike underway against American forces in Dhahran. What we do know is that U.S. forces have launched airstrikes against Iraq and Kuwait, both by manned aircraft and we believe by unmanned cruise-style missiles. Air raid signals sounded around Dhahran, as you heard Bob Simon report. Then everybody was told to head for the shelters. Whether there's an attack or whether it was simply an alert, we do not know. Now, you heard Bob Simon talk about the so-called Scud missile. The Scud missile is the best that the Iraqis have. It has a reputation of, one, having fairly short range, but enough range to reach targets in Saudi Arabia, including Dhahran. It has the reputation of being a very inaccurate missile. Now there are air raid sirens in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Now we want to go to the map and show you where Riyadh is. If we can get the map up, we try to keep you posted on the map where things are happening. Riyadh is the capital of Saudi Arabia. Again, people are moving to the air raid shelters there. On the map, you can see Riyadh is more in the center of the country, the major cities in Saudi Arabia that for the moment you want to have in mind. Dhahran, where the big U.S. base is over near the Persian Gulf. Riyadh in more or less the middle part of Saudi Arabia. And then Jeddah, which is over on the Red Sea, which is far away from Iraq and not under what we might call ordinary combat circumstances reachable by the Iraqi missiles. Now, again, underscoring, we do not know whether Dhahran or Riyadh is actually under attack. We do know that air raid signals have gone off in both places, and people have moved to the shelters. Now, we believe we can hear the air raid sirens sounding in Dhahran, so let's pause and listen to the sounds of war. This is from Riyadh. These are the sounds of Riyadh as war begins in the Middle East. Air raid sirens in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. As you look at the map, you could tell Riyadh is, I emphasize, is the capital of Saudi Arabia. Jeddah is its biggest commercial city, which is on the Red Sea. As you looked at the map, Jeddah would be off to the left, off to the west, and Dhahran would be off to the east. Now, trying to bring you up to date very quickly on what we know and what we don't know. War in the Middle East, combat around the Persian Gulf. Offensive strikes by the U.S. Air Force, by, we believe, U.S. Navy and Marine aircraft as well, although we do not know about the latter. The only thing that's been officially announced by any military spokesman is the engagement of U.S. F-15E fighter bombers, those aircraft designed to knock out Iraqi planes from the sky if necessary, and also capable of attacking targets from the ground. David Martin at the Pentagon has reported that his information is that U.S. cruise-style missiles, known as Tomahawks, the particular style of cruise missile being used in this instance, also have been launched against targets in Iraq and possibly also in Kuwait. We do not know the extent of the attacks in Iraq and Kuwait. What we do know is that the raids have been underway for about 2 hours now. Our most reliable information from U.S. military sources, this was official information, is that the raids began about 4:50 this afternoon Eastern Time. We had some indication of them as we began the CBS Evening News at 6:30 this evening Eastern Time, and then as the evening news developed, it became clear that the air war had begun. I want to pause and again emphasize, and particularly for those of you who are just now joining our coverage, so far as can be determined, the air war has started. No offensive action on the ground that anyone can determine. The sequence of events that happened today, in no particular order, there were reports that Saddam Hussein was making efforts to move his chemical warfare machinery closer to U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia. Quickly behind that came an even more heightened alert for U.S. forces in and around Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf. And then there was silence, as there frequently is just before an offensive attack. And then the United States attacked targets in Iraq and in Kuwait using manned aircraft. When we say manned aircraft, it's easy when you put up a picture, as we did, of that F-15E, to think of it as a highly sophisticated piece of technological weaponry, and that it is. But in the cockpit is a young man, average age 22, 23 years old, who just a few short years ago was quarterbacking his high school football team, or maybe looking for a jump shot at the top of the key. There are people, there are men in those aircraft. Yes, there are women who fly in the U.S. military, but by law, women are not allowed to be in combat units, so there'll be no women in the cockpits of these particular airplanes. Now, we want to go to Tom Fenton in Israel. Tom Fenton by telephone from Israel. Tom, any sign of activity, special activity there, and what do you hear, what do you know?
Well, no sign of special activity yet, although one of Israeli radio monitors said that he cannot find Baghdad radio, so presumably it's off the air. But earlier this evening, Prime Minister Shamir indicated that the United States has apparently dropped its reluctance to coordinate its air battle plans with Israel. Shamir said on television that there's some sort of an agreement with the United States and that Israel was maintaining contact. Now, Saddam Hussein, as you know, has threatened to hit Israel if he's attacked, and presumably he would hit Israel with chemical weapons. The Israelis have made it clear that they would retaliate and would not just let the U.S. Air Force do the job of taking out the missiles. So there was a great deal of worry that Israeli planes and American planes would be in the air at the same time, and perhaps American pilots and Israeli pilots might shoot each other down. The agreement, if there has been an agreement, sort of clears the decks now for the Israeli Air Force to take action. Israeli planes have been in the air on a round-the-clock basis. Whether they will now do something before Israel is hit, if it is hit, is unclear. We're in sort of a gray area now. It wouldn't be a preemptive strike because there's a war already going on. So we'll just have to wait until we get an announcement, and one I think is expected soon.
Thank you, Tom. We're going to try to go to General Michael Dugan, the retired commander of the United States Air Force, very recently retired. I'm told that we can't get General Dugan up at the moment. One of the important questions of the hour is if Iraqi missiles or planes are attacking Saudi Arabia, what their likely targets would be. We have air raid sirens in both Dhahran and in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and people moving to air raid shelters in both places. We do not know whether any actual Iraqi attacks are underway. The Iraqis are most likely to try to attack with their Scud missiles. Bob Schieffer is with General George Christ, the retired United States Marine General. Bob, taking into account everything that we know and have heard thus far, what is your and General Christ's best assessment of what's probably happening, while emphasizing that so far as we know it's an air war here in the early hours?
Well, that seems to be what it is, doesn't it, General? This region is exploding. And one bit of information, Dan, that we've just gotten here. An AP network news reporter named Tony Winton, in an urgent voice over a telephone just a moment ago, said, Washington, we're seeing activity in the hotel. He is in Dhahran. After saying that, his line went dead. So this fits in with the other things that we're hearing from Bob Simon. General, when the air raid sirens were heard in Dhahran, what would the Iraqis use to attack Dhahran, and had that been expected?
Well, the Iraqis have three kinds of bombers. A Su-24 that's very much like our own F-111, Tu-16, Tu-20. These are good long-range bombers. He also has missiles, what is known as the Al-Hussein missile, which is a modified Scud missile. That's got about a 390-mile range, and that can cover this area. Now, we have air defenses between that, the Patriot missiles, the Hawk missiles, that can take down, or at least we think they can take down, those incoming Scud missiles. We also, of course, have the F-15s in the air and the F-A-18s fighter aircraft up there with AWACS, so it's going to be difficult for him to get his airplanes through. But he has the capability, Bob.
Now let's go back and talk about when the reporters first saw those flashes of light on the horizon back up in Baghdad. Were they seeing, could they see as far as Kuwait, or were they seeing something very near the downtown Baghdad area? What would you
they're
surmise?
seeing these airports, these major airfields, about 3 or so within very close distance of Baghdad. There's also some command centers up there, air defense centers, so they're probably seeing that under attack. I think, Bob, that attacks are also going on at airfields in the north and airfields south of Baghdad that generally run along the river all the way down to Kuwait with the air defenses. I think that there are other airplanes on those F-15Es in the air now going after those things.
Well, this is going exactly as you and other military experts have suspected that it would, and that is some sort of an air attack, apparently massive air attacks. What do you think is happening right now from what we know, John?
What I think is happening right now is that first their surface-to-air missiles are now being taken out by the F-4G, the Wild Weasel aircraft, and the EA-6As being jammed as they try to get rid of those air defenses. At the same time, they're attacking those airfields, trying to get the airplanes on the grounds and in their shelters, going after communication centers, and the missiles that have everybody warned about, I think they're going after too, Bob.
Thank you, General. Back to you, Dan.
CBS News producer and reporter John Reed is in a protective bunker in Dhahran. Remember, that's on the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia, near the Persian Gulf. John, what's happening there at the moment?
Well, it's just everybody, hello, Dan, it's just everybody sitting around down in the basement of the International Hotel here. The sirens went off. We tried to broadcast as long as possible, as you know. And then the hotel cut the power. I'm sure it's for lights out and for safety. We have no idea whether there's any real air raid about. None of us are going to gamble with that, or of course, we're going to stay down here in the basement until it's all clear. Everybody just grabbed their gas masks and their chemical suits and ran down in the dark.
Thank you very much, John Reed. Let's leave that map up for just a moment, if you will, please, because it will help us orient people. As you look at the map, there have been air raid sirens. That doesn't necessarily mean air attacks. Air raid sirens in Riyadh, in the center of Saudi Arabia, the capital of the country. Dhahran there on the coast around the Persian Gulf. Look, just north of Dhahran, there's a road that runs from Dhahran right on up into Kuwait. While Kuwait is not marked on this particular map, it's right there at the, well, you can see it in slight red below Iraq. On that road, leading from Dhahran up to Kuwait, is where the U.S. Marines are basically based. If you look on the map now to the west, that is looking off to the left of the map above Dhahran, is basically where U.S. Army troops are. That would include the airborne units, the 24th Mechanized Infantry, the 7th Corps. Now, Kuwait City, this gives you a close in. This is of Kuwait itself. Now look down just at the bottom of the map. As you can see, Saudi Arabia, the air raids, the air attacks, so far as we can determine, are in both Iraq and in Kuwait. We know that they involve F-15E fighters and other various U.S. fighter and fighter bomber aircraft. It's believed that some cruise missiles, the so-called Tomahawk missiles, have been fired into Iraq. Doug Tunnell is in Jordan. Now, if you remember your map there, and again, we'll show you the map in a moment, Jordan has borders with Saudi Arabia, with Iraq, and with Israel. Doug Tunnell is in Amman, Jordan. Doug, any sign there of heightened activity?
Not heightened activity, Dan, but tremendous tension here. Amman right now is an almost silent city. People waiting, people listening, people monitoring foreign broadcasts. Jordanian radio and TV has not yet announced to the kingdom that the war is underway. It said that they're waiting for word from the palace. CBS News has been told that King Hussein in his palace tonight is monitoring developments in the war and is aware of the situation there, but has not yet determined to tell the people here. That announcement, of course, could be a potentially explosive one for people here, given their strong sentiments in support of Saddam Hussein and largely against military action against Iraq. Also tonight, there is great fear about those Iraqi missiles because, as you pointed out, Jordan is squarely between Iraq and Israel, and Iraq has threatened that in the event of war they would use the missiles or launch some sort of an attack on Israel. That leaves Jordan in the middle, everyone here waiting and listening tonight to see if that attack should get underway.
Doug Dell, Amman, and again, if we can put that map up, when we were in Jordan and our various visits to the Middle East over the last few months, one of the remarkable things to me at least was when you drove the road from Amman up to Jordan's border with Iraq, you could virtually see just across Jordan's border with Iraq, where some of Iraq's most extensive Scud missile sites are. There's a reason for that, because the Iraqis wanted to put those Scuds in the best position to strike against Israel, emphasizing, so far as anybody knows, no Scud missiles have yet been fired. But if and when Scud missiles are fired by the Iraqis, it would be possible along that Jordanian border on the Jordanian side to see the flashes of light as they were fired. Now, there are reports of gunfire over Baghdad. Our people in Baghdad don't know whether the gunfire is incoming, outgoing, or both. They're the report of the Tomahawk missiles, that's the cruise. When we say a cruise, that's an unmanned missile that can avoid radar and avoid enemy detection devices. It carries a warhead. It's a so-called smart missile. We believe that those cruise-style missiles have been fired. Squadron of F-15Es took off from central Saudi Arabia, and one of the Air Force officers in charge said, quote, "This is history in the making." Marlin Fitzwater has announced, quote, "The liberation of Kuwait is underway," and he said it was under, and the military gives names to these things, under the name of Desert Storm. That's an upgrade, as it were, from Desert Shield. The President of the United States is going to address the nation and the world in about an hour and 25 minutes from now. That would be at 9 o'clock Eastern Time here in the United States. President Bush will be addressing the nation. Air raid sirens in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, and in Riyadh. No confirmation, repeat, no confirmation that actual air attacks are underway. Could have been precautionary, but air raid sirens have gone off in Dhahran and Riyadh. There are many more U.S. military people in and around Dhahran than around the capital city of Riyadh, but in both places, people have been moved to bomb shelters. General Michael Dugan, the recently retired U.S. Air Force general, is still with us in our Washington Bureau. General Dugan, what kind of targets would be considered prime around Baghdad?
Around Baghdad, Dan, the chief targets would be those command and control kinds of nodes, centers, that Saddam Hussein would use to exercise his control of his broad military forces in the country, and in particular his air defense forces.
And in Kuwait, what targets would be considered prime?
In Kuwait and in the broader areas in Iraq, one would look, for example, at the Scud missiles, I think, early on. They are important to U.S. forces. They're important to the coalition partners. They're important to the civilians that live in the various cities in the vicinity. And those would be a key target that would have political impact in addition to a military impact, and I think that they would be high, likely, on General Schwarzkopf's list of important targets.
As we continue our CBS News live coverage of war in the Middle East, General Dugan, the first order of business is to get command of the sky, so-called air superiority. The second order of business would be to take out the Scud missiles, or is that likely to be undertaken simultaneously?
There's a lot of things one does simultaneously, Dan. Air superiority is a condition that one wants to establish so that one can use his air forces to do a whole range of other tasks.
General, forgive me, please. As part of our live coverage, a state of emergency is being declared in Israel. We go to CBS News correspondent Tom Fenton. Tom?
Dan, that was the Israeli army spokesman who declared the state of emergency, and he instructed the public to open up these little gas mask kit boxes we've all been carrying around with us for the last few days. They contain gas masks with filters for chemical warfare, atropine syringes, and antidote to nerve gas. The public has been told to open up these kits, which were sealed when they were given them, but not to put the masks on yet. As you know, Saddam Hussein threatened to attack Israel if he were attacked, and the assumption is that the attack would be with chemical weapons, missiles, Scud missiles, which could hit Tel Aviv, and tipped with chemical warheads. Iraq is expected or suspected of having as many as 20 chemical warheads. It's not known, however, whether any of these have been loaded onto missiles. Israel has pinpointed a number of missile sites in western Iraq that it would hit if attacked, and has even indicated it might go so far as to attack Baghdad. Dan?
Tom Fenton, stay on the line with us from Israel. A state of emergency declared in Israel, so far as we can determine strictly as precaution. Retired Air Force General Michael Dugan, what would be the threat to Israel? We talk about the threat of the Scud missiles. How real, how viable is that threat, and what other threats might there be?
The major threat is, in fact, Scud missiles, and it's probably Scud missiles with something like a chemical warhead. The Scud missile has a decent range, but it's not a particularly accurate missile. Indeed, some military analysts have said that it is not militarily effective, because while it might come close to an air base, it might come close to a major military formation, it in fact will not key in on specific identifiable targets at the headquarters of that formation. So Scud missiles with chemical warheads on them, for example, against a well-prepared and well-trained army that has chemical decontamination equipment, that has gas masks, has chemical suits, is not a particularly effective military weapon. It's a terrorist weapon, Dan.
And speaking of terrorism, of course, part of the Iraqi plan, which they said in advance, one, they said they would attempt to bring Israel into the war as quickly as possible. Saddam Hussein said it. He said it to me in our interview in August. His top aides repeated it in our most recent trip to Baghdad just a few days ago. They also said that they would not rule out the possibility of using chemical weapons. At one time in August they said they would, but then that went by the boards. Tom Fenton, any air raid signals or sirens in Israel, or what we have is simply this, I say simply, the important declaring of a state of emergency?
No, that's what we have so far. Now, the Israelis are assuming it will be chemical warheads if they're used, and that's an important thing to know, because if they're conventional warheads, Israelis would be told to go down into the basements and bomb shelters. If it's chemical, they'd be told to go inside buildings and go into the upper floors. You may remember from the Iraqi attack on the Kurds in Halabja, these were Iraqi citizens, that many people went down into their basements and died there because the poison gas tends to seek a lower level. So far, that's all we have. We may get more instructions later in the night. We may also hear more about what, if anything, the Israeli Air Force is going to do. At the moment, all we know is that the Israelis have promised the United States they would not stage a preemptive attack. A war is now underway. Whether the Israelis would take some action now is simply an open question. Dan?
Tom, General Dugan, and before I come to you again, General Dugan, for those of you who are joining our broadcast now, let us pause for a second and say this is part of what will be our continuing CBS News coverage of war in and around the Persian Gulf. So far as can be determined in the early stages, we're in the first three and a half hours of the war. It is an air war. General Michael Dugan was until very recently the United States Air Force top military officer. You may recall that he was relieved of his command, that he left the service because it was alleged that he spoke too candidly about the kind of rolling air thunder the United States could muster against Iraq if it became necessary. Now, General Dugan is now a CBS News consultant. You'll be seeing him exclusively as part of our coverage. Retired U.S. Marine General George Christ, who has been helping us right along here for a few months, at one time, not too long ago, commanded all U.S. forces in and around the Persian Gulf. It is one of the ranking military authorities on the Iraq-Iran war, on Iraq's capability, and on U.S. military capability. A reminder that the President of the United States will be addressing the American people and the world on the subject of war in the Middle East, a war that is now underway at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll be here, of course, to cover that with you live. Now, General Dugan, thanks for being patient with us here. We were talking earlier that you thought that in terms of offensive or strike-back capability, which the Iraqis seemed bound to try, if indeed they aren't trying, the Scud missile was number one. In terms of piloted aircraft, their best aircraft is the French-made Mirage?
That's their best air-to-air airplane. In terms of strike capabilities, Dan, their best airplane is probably the Su-24. General Christ mentioned a few minutes ago that it is similar to in size and shape and mission to F-111s that the United States Air Force operates.
General, if I'm not sure, and it's part of our live coverage, that you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing, but are you seeing the map that has Baghdad and Iraq in the various circles?
I do see that map.
Let's talk for just quickly now. We're talking about Iraq's capabilities. First, reading upper left around, the Al Hussein missile, which is capable of reaching in that outer perimeter area. What is that missile? What is it designed to do?
It is an Iraqi upgrade, essentially, of a Scud missile. The Iraqis have industrial capability internal to their nation. They have some engineering capability in terms of design, and it is a land attack missile, surface-to-surface missile that carries typically a conventional general purpose warhead that would go against a mix of targets.
And if the Iraqis were firing missiles at Dhahran or Riyadh, would it be safe to believe that possibly it would be one of those kind of missiles, the Al Hussein or Scud?
That's certainly a possibility, Dan.
Now, if we can go back to that map with the various strike areas and put it up again, I want to quickly run down the other capabilities. And the Al Abbas missile, is that also a Scud?
Again, it's an upgrade of a Scud. It's a conversion of a Scud. It follows along the similar kinds of lines and forms and size and shape.
All right, now, and the Mirage F-1E fighter, a French aircraft, you say is their best air-to-air. And if, as we believe, that as we speak, air-to-air combat is underway, that is one plane against another over Iraq, it's most likely that the Iraqis would have up the Mirage, or is that too much to believe?
No, one should expect that the Mirages would be up, and if you were disappointed and wrong, if you were wrong, you wouldn't be disappointed. But the Mirages are probably their most capable fighters in some regards because of the training given to the Mirage pilots. Mirage pilots were trained by the French when they sold the equipment to Iraq. And they were trained in much more flexible tactics than is typical of the general Iraqi pilot brigade that was trained largely following Soviet tactics.
General Dugan, our CBS News consultant, until recently commander of the United States Air Force, I think many people do not yet realize that in modern air-to-air combat and air-to-ground combat, a great deal of it is done by computer and done with electronics. But insofar as it gets down to one fighter pilot against another, what's it like up there? What's it like up there tonight for a person, a young man in the cockpit of a U.S. fighter plane?
It's lonely, man. Most of our fighters are, in fact, single-seat fighters. We had a discussion a few minutes ago about the F-15E. It, in fact, has 2 seats in it, a pilot in the front and a weapons system officer that runs the radar and does the intercept activities. The F-111, which is a interdiction bomber, has 2 people in it. But most of the F-15s, most of the F-16s, all of the A-10s are single-seat airplanes. And when one gets involved in the combat operation, it gets lonely. There's a lot of other airplanes around. There's a lot of iron in the air. There's a lot of calls on the radio to check left and look right and look for a missile. But it's lonely.
We have a report that the U.S. Embassy in Amman, Jordan, has just been evacuated. We have not confirmed that, but we believe it to be true, evacuated as a precaution. Let me underscore, and anyone who's been in Jordan recently knows full well that the U.S. Embassy there has been on alert for a long time. Jordan is in many ways a fragile country. It has the Bedouin population that commands the country, basically in the form of King Hussein, not to be confused with Saddam Hussein, but King Hussein of Jordan, and that it has a very large Palestinian population. And there have been concerns all along that if war should break out, as it has this evening, that some instability could occur in Jordan. But I want to underscore that if there has been any outbreak of any kind of violence in Jordan, we are not aware of it. What we know, and all we know, is that there is a report the U.S. Embassy in Amman, Jordan, as a precaution, has just been evacuated. David Martin is at the Pentagon. David, the war that has started in and around the Persian Gulf is only the beginning. It's what Churchill calls this avalanche of fire and steel from the air. Where is it likely to go from here?
Well, it's going to go inevitably toward a ground offensive, which is designed to literally push the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. Now, the real question here is, will the Iraqi army, will the Iraqi military continue to fight under the kind of air bombardment that's going on now? And of course, as of yet, we do not know how successful this air bombardment is. This, again, is just the first wave, and what we're seeing is such a small fraction of what was put together. For instance, the report that 20 F-15Es have left from that base in central Saudi Arabia. Well, we haven't heard anything about the stealth fighter, but there were, I think, 40 stealth fighters in country. We haven't heard anything about the F-111, which was the bomber used to attack Libya back in 1986. That is also in country and is capable of flying low and fast at night. That is also part of the strike package that has been put together. We haven't heard anything about planes launched from aircraft carriers, but those too were part of the strikes that were being put together that will attempt to integrate both the Air Force and the Navy fighters. Now, not everything is going to go at once, because the plan here was to make it virtually around-the-clock, non-stop air assault on Iraq and its military. And we just do not know how successful it is. For instance, one of the prime targets in this early phase is going to be the command and control centers, the bunkers from which Saddam Hussein might be attempting to direct his own forces in response. Now, if one of those bombs hits the right bunker and gets Saddam Hussein, perhaps we could have an early end to this war. But obviously the military can't plan on that. They've got to plan on this ground offensive. And I think the next question, after you answer how successful the air raids that are going on now, how successful they are, the next question is, how long are they going to continue before the commander in the field, in this case General Norman Schwarzkopf in Riyadh, decides that the Iraqi military in Kuwait has been pulverized to the point that you can attempt a ground offensive. We don't know when that's going to be, but there is a lot more in the pipeline targeted at those troops in Kuwait. For instance, B-52s. I think B-52s, which carry up to 50 bombs, will not be used until all the air defenses are out of there, but they too are in this plan.
David, stay with us here if you will. Oil prices shot up $3 per barrel in cash trading behind closed doors tonight here in New York. That's as war with Iraq began. Keep in mind that the market itself had closed. We're talking about cash transactions behind closed doors, oil shooting up $3 a barrel. We're also going to go fairly soon to Norfolk, Virginia, and get the mood there and at some other military-centered communities around the country. We are monitoring moment by moment the air war, which has begun in Iraq, in Kuwait, with the United States forces tonight on the attack. We're awaiting President Bush's address to the nation at 9 o'clock. Our last report was that there were flashes of light in the distance around Baghdad. Then the flashes of light seemed to subside. No one knew whether those flashes of light were actually connected to air raids or anti-aircraft fire from the Iraqis. All we know, what we knew, and was that there were flashes of light in the distance. Our last report was they had subsided somewhat. The U.S. military has confirmed, has officially announced, that F-15E Eagle fighter bombers took off from air bases in central Saudi Arabia to run attacks in Iraq. And then later Marlon Fitzwater at the White House, so in his statement, which was short, blunt, to the point, made it clear that the attack was also taking place in Kuwait. So far, air war. If there's any combat on the ground, we're not aware of it, and we believe we would be. How long these airstrikes last, to what extent they're being conducted, is one of the mysteries at the moment as the fog of war begins to descend on Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the Persian Gulf, and that whole area. It may be worth emphasizing that in the run-up to the war, in the build-up to the war, the chairman of the U.S. Military Joint Chiefs, Army General Colin Powell, time after time made it clear to the Iraqis that once the war started, that if he had anything to say about it, and he figured he'd have a lot, it would not be a case of start-stop. It would be the full force of the United States military. So what David Martin was saying a moment ago may be worth pondering, that we have the first cutting edge of the U.S. military wedge, but there's plenty to come from behind that if the original plan as outlined by General Colin Powell stays. Now, the hope has been and is certainly the prayerful hope of this hour that the combat may be short, but once war begins, no one can be certain of that. We do not yet know what the Iraqi response has been. There have been those air raid signals in Dhahran and Riyadh, but we're not sure. We certainly have no empirical evidence that attack is underway. But let's go to Bob Simon in Dhahran. Bob, I gather you're out of the air raid shelters at the moment. Was there an attack?
There was no attack, Dan. It was called a national alert, a national warning. Everyone in the hotel was ordered down into the shelters. Everyone was ordered to put their gas masks on. The American Joint Information Bureau here, the military people who should be keeping us informed on what's going on, were also down in the shelter, walking around in full combat gear with their gas masks. There was a British retired officer who's in charge of of chemical warfare here, who was hustling everybody into their masks and warning that there could be an attack. There was no attack. We've been out here for a while trying to get to New York. It's been fairly lonely. There's been very little traffic on the roads. A while ago, the steady stream of F-15s that had been taking off from here stopped. We understand that just moments ago, the all clear sounded, and life will shortly, presumably, be returning back to normal as a place can be that is packed with journalists and military people.
Bob, have the wave after wave, has the wave after wave of aircraft taking off from Dhahran subsided any?
Yes, there's been nothing taking off for the last 20 minutes that we've been out here. In fact, what was the hectic activity of an hour ago has been replaced by what I can only describe as a somewhat eerie silence. Just as the air raid siren was going off, there was an enormous amount of what looked like emergency road traffic. There were a lot of flashing red lights and a lot of sirens. There were some kinds of security vehicles and ambulances, I believe. Then that stopped. Now everything has stopped, and people are coming out of the shelters now. This alert, whatever it was, is over. We were afraid, frankly, from the beginning that the Saudis, who are in charge of security here, would be rather fast to push the panic button, and I'm afraid that's what happened this time, or it might just have been an exercise, in which case it might have been warranted, to make sure that they had their system running. The personnel in the hotel were walking around the corridors in miners' hats and flashlights and checking on everyone's room to make sure that nobody was in their room, nobody was in the restaurant, and everybody was ordered down to the shelters.
Thank you very much, Bob Simon in Dhahran, where the air raid sirens have ceased, where people are now coming out of the bunkers where they went as a precaution, and apparently there was no raid on Dhahran. Let's go to Lucy Spiegel, CBS News reporter and producer in the Saudi Arabian capital of Riyadh. Lucy, what's the situation there?
Dan, even as we speak, the air raid siren is sounding once again here. This is the second one we've had this evening. It has been ringing for about the last 90 seconds. We had a period of about 20-25 minutes in between the warnings.
Lucy, if you can, put the receiver up as close as you can to the sound, and let's see if we can hear the air raid siren.
Walking over to it now, Dan.
In the old city of caravans and desert people, Riyadh, now a modern capital of Saudi Arabia, live from Riyadh, the sound of air raid sirens tonight as war is underway in the Middle East. Marlin Fitzwater at the White House a short while ago said that, quote, the liberation of Kuwait, unquote, is underway. What has been called Desert Shield is now, in Fitzwater's term, the U.S. official military term for the offensive against Iraq. The siege of Iraq and Kuwait is now called Operation Desert Storm. The President of the United States is scheduled to speak to the nation about an hour from now. A squadron of F-15E U.S. fighter bombers took off from central Saudi Arabia, headed north, and according to an official U.S. military spokesman, they were headed to make strikes against Iraq and or Kuwait. Continuing reports of cruise-type missiles being fired, we believe, from ships in the area at targets in Iraq and or Kuwait. Reports of gunfire around Baghdad, none in Baghdad itself. Those early reports now are that the gunfire in and around Baghdad, at our last contact with Baghdad, that they had subsided. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News correspondent, is with the families of some U.S. fighting men and women in Norfolk, Virginia. Richard, what's the mood there?
Well, Dan, as you know, Norfolk, Virginia is a company town, and the company is the United States Navy. This is the headquarters of the Navy's Atlantic Fleet. And imagine what is at stake in this town. 31,000 servicemen and women have shipped out of here since Desert Shield began, before it became Desert Storm tonight. What we are reporting tonight is what everybody in this town has feared, but it is not unexpected. We've been here for the last 48 hours or so talking to parents and sisters and mothers of the servicemen and women overseas, and they have long since stopped talking about if we go to war and had started talking about when we go to war. Everybody has been at prayer vigils. There's the amazing coming together of support groups. The United States Navy can be a very close family in times of trouble, and this is certainly a time of trouble here in Norfolk. Dan?
Richard, it may be important for those families and those all over the United States who have men and women in the U.S. military in the area to know how strongly Americans in general feel. We've been flooded with telephone calls here. How strongly Americans in general feel in support of our military men and women abroad. However one may feel about the policy, however one may feel about President Bush and how he's handled the situation, that one enormous difference between what's been happening these past few months and indeed what's happening tonight and previous situations with any similarity is how people, so many Americans, seem to be able, in their own minds and hearts, to give complete support to the Expeditionary Force so far from home and in so much peril, and at the same time, if they're so inclined to do so, question the policy that put them there. It's just a note to say that for those of you who have men and women in the U.S. military in harm's way tonight, as war is underway in the Middle East, to know how strongly that everybody wants to bond with you and say, directly and personally, we're with you. Now, as part of our live continuing CBS News coverage of war in and around the Persian Gulf, we're going to pause for a few seconds. Stick right here with us. A lot of information is coming in. We'll sort it out for you and try to pass it along to you in a steady, reliable, dependable flow, so stay here with us.
You are watching CBS News continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening. The United States of America is at war. This CBS News coverage of the Showdown in the Gulf will be on the air around the clock now. The battle over Iraq and Kuwait has begun, as President Bush's spokesman Marlin Fitzwater put it, quote, the liberation of Kuwait has begun. At the moment, it is an air war. If there's any combat involving ground forces, we are not aware of it. At the White House, that was a terse announcement that was passed along by the official spokesman. Here it is.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun. In conjunction with the forces of our coalition partners, the United States has moved under the code name Operation Desert Storm to enforce the mandates of the United Nations Security Council. As of 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Operation Desert Storm forces were engaging targets in Kuwait and Iraq. President Bush will address the nation at 9:00 p.m. tonight from the Oval Office. I'll try to get you more as soon as we can. Thank you very much.
He took no questions. Desert Storm. U.S. Air Forces now are in the air, on the attack, in and over Iraq and Kuwait. In Iraq, weapons have been exploding. Reports from Baghdad say refineries are being hit. That has not been confirmed, but it is believed to be true that refineries are among the targets being struck in Iraq. And in the air, a number of Saudi Arabian cities have their air filled with the wail of air raid sirens in both Riyadh and Dhahran. Citizens, this is inside Saudi Arabia, were ordered into shelters, into bunkers, and were ordered to put their gas masks on. But no attack came at Dhahran, one of the main staging areas inside Saudi Arabia for the U.S. Air Force and for other U.S. military forces. The massive U.S. attack began about an hour ago from bases in central Saudi Arabia. The first edges of the attack officially are believed to have started as early as about 4:50 p.m. Eastern Time in the United States this afternoon. The White House had planned for the United States military to hit hard, to hit consistently, not to let up, as one military person put it, that once we go, we intend to grab them, not let go, and shake hard, into quotation. And President Bush has been as good as his promise. He said the attack would come earlier, not later, once the January 15th deadline passed, as it did last night. President Bush will be addressing the nation about 55 minutes from now. That'll be at 9 o'clock in the Eastern Time Zone. There will be a Pentagon briefing, the first of the military briefings, and that's where we'll get our first official